There are moments in life when everything seems stacked against you, when the world feels cold and cruel, and when you start to wonder if kindness and hard work really matter anymore. But then, once in a while, a story comes along that reminds you why you should never give up hope. Today, I'm going to share with you one of the most incredible tales of perseverance, hidden kindness, and perfect karma that I've ever encountered. Before we dive into this life-changing story, I need you to do something for me. If you're someone who still believes that good things happen to good people, if you think that those who show kindness deserve kindness in return, hit that like button right now. Your simple click tells me that you're ready to be inspired, that you're open to having your faith in humanity restored. And listen, if stories like this one touch your heart the way they touch mine, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because every week, I bring you real stories about real people who faced impossible odds and found a way to triumph. These aren't fairy tales or made-up feel-good stories. These are the kinds of incredible, true events that happen when ordinary people refuse to give up, even when the whole world seems to be against them. Trust me, what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. It's a story that will make you angry, make you cry, make you cheer, and ultimately make you believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of balancing the scales in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. So get comfortable, because Maria's story is about to change how you see the power of persistence and the magic that can happen when someone truly sees your worth. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez, a woman whose story will break your heart before it rebuilds your faith in everything good about this world. 2 years ago, Maria was living what most people would call an ordinary life in a small Texas town called Millbrook. She was married to Carlos, the love of her life for 23 years, and together they were raising two incredible kids, Sophia, who was 17 and dreaming of becoming a nurse, and Miguel, 15 and passionate about engineering. But life has a way of shattering our sense of security in the cruelest possible ways. When Carlos was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Maria's world didn't just change, it completely collapsed. For 8 months, she watched the strongest man she'd ever known fight a battle he couldn't win. 8 months of hospital visits, experimental treatments, and medical bills that grew larger every single day. 8 months of hope followed by devastating disappointment. When Carlos finally passed away, Maria wasn't just grieving the loss of her soulmate. She was drowning in over $60,000 of medical debt. The house they'd worked so hard to buy, the home where they'd raised their children and built their dreams, was now at risk. The bank wasn't interested in her tears or her sob story. They wanted their money, and they wanted it fast. With Sophia needing money for college applications and Miguel outgrowing his clothes faster than Maria could afford to replace them, desperation became her constant companion. She had no college degree, no professional experience, and at 52 years old, nobody seemed interested in giving her a chance. The only thing she had left was something her grandmother had passed down to her decades ago, a recipe for tamales that could make grown men weep with joy. So Maria made a decision that would change everything. She took her grandmother's recipe, bought the cheapest ingredients she could find, and set up a tiny cart outside Miller's grocery store. $3 per tamale, working from dawn until dark, standing in the Texas heat that could melt asphalt. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't what she'd imagined for her life. But it was honest work, and Maria Gonzalez had never been afraid of honest work. She had no idea that this humble beginning would lead to the most extraordinary journey of her entire life. Every morning at 5:30, while the rest of Millbrook was still sleeping, Maria would be in her tiny kitchen, rolling masa and preparing filling with the same care her grandmother had taught her 50 years ago. The recipe was sacred: perfectly seasoned pork, tender beef, and her secret blend of spices that had been passed down through 4 generations of strong women who knew how to turn simple ingredients into something magical. By 7 a.m., she'd be wheeling her small cart to the corner outside Miller's grocery store, hoping that today would be better than yesterday, that maybe she'd sell enough tamales to keep the lights on for another week. $3 each. That's all she charged. It might not sound like much to you, but for Maria, every single sale meant the difference between hope and despair. The work was backbreaking. Standing for 12 hours straight in the scorching Texas sun, her hands cramped from handling hot masa, her back aching from bending over the cart hundreds of times a day. But Maria never complained, never showed the exhaustion that was eating away at her spirit. She smiled at every customer, thanked them genuinely, and poured her heart into every single tamale she made. But here's where this story gets ugly, and I need you to prepare yourself for what some human beings are capable of. The wealthy residents of Millbrook didn't see Maria's determination or her dignity. They saw what they considered an eyesore, a reminder of poverty that made them uncomfortable. Women who spent more on their weekly manicures than Maria made in a month would walk past her cart with looks of disgust, loud enough for her to hear their cruel comments. "Look at that desperate woman," they'd whisper. "Doesn't she know she's lowering our property values?" The store manager, a man named Pete who'd never missed a meal in his life, would constantly threaten to call the police if she didn't move her cart. "You're blocking traffic," he'd lie, even though her small setup took up less space than a parked motorcycle. Every day, Maria would swallow her pride and smile through the humiliation. She'd think about Sophia's college dreams and Miguel's growing feet, and she'd remind herself that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. Little did she know that someone was watching her grace under pressure, someone who understood exactly what real character looked like. Then something beautiful happened in the middle of all this cruelty. Every Tuesday at exactly 12:30 in the afternoon, a quiet man would appear at Maria's cart. He wasn't flashy or loud like so many people who demanded attention. He dressed simply: worn jeans, plain t-shirts, old sneakers that had seen better days. But there was something different about him, something in his eyes that showed genuine respect. "6 tamales, please," he'd say in a soft voice, and he'd wait patiently while Maria carefully wrapped each one. He never complained about the price, never tried to negotiate, and here's what made Maria's heart sing. He always left a $2 tip, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Thank you. These are wonderful," he'd say every single week, and Maria could tell he meant it. In a world full of people who looked right through her, this man saw her as a human being worthy of kindness. But while this one bright spot kept Maria going, the harassment was getting worse by the day. The city council, pressured by complaints from the respectable residents, suddenly decided that food cart permits needed to cost $500 a month instead of $50. $500 that Maria didn't have. Money that would mean choosing between keeping her business alive and keeping her family fed. The health inspector, who'd never bothered with food carts before, started showing up weekly with a magnifying glass, desperate to find violations that didn't exist. Maria's cart was spotless, her food fresh and properly stored, but they kept coming back, hoping to find a reason to shut her down. The local newspaper even ran a cruel article with the headline, "Widow's Cart, Eyesore or Economic Necessity," as if Maria's struggle to survive was some kind of public debate. Every night, Maria would count her meager earnings and wonder how much longer she could hold on. Sophia needed money for her college applications. Miguel's school shoes were falling apart. And that foreclosure notice sitting on her kitchen table demanded $8,000 in 30 days. The walls were closing in from every direction, but Maria kept showing up, kept smiling, kept believing that somehow things would get better. She had no idea that her Tuesday regular was about to change everything in ways she never could have imagined. Desperation has a way of crushing even the strongest people, and Maria was reaching her absolute limit. She started working 16-hour days, setting up her cart before sunrise and staying until the last possible customer might appear. Her hands were covered in burns from the hot mesa, her back screamed in constant pain, and she'd lost so much weight that her clothes hung on her like empty sacks. But still, she pushed forward because giving up meant watching her children's futures crumble along with everything Carlos had worked so hard to build. The foreclosure notice felt like a death sentence. $8,000 in 30 days, or lose the only home Sophia and Miguel had ever known. Maria would lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and doing impossible math in her head, trying to figure out how to make miracles happen with pocket change. Then came the day that nearly broke her completely. Richard Blackwood, who owned the fanciest restaurant in Millbrook and drove a car worth more than most people's houses, decided to make Maria his personal target. In front of a crowd of shoppers and his wealthy friends, he pointed directly at her cart and raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at this pathetic spectacle," he announced with disgust dripping from every word. This desperate woman is single-handedly ruining our town's reputation. We work hard to build a respectable community, and then we have to look at this eyesore every single day. His friends laughed and nodded, enjoying the show. Mr. Mayor, he continued, addressing the mayor who happened to be shopping nearby, you need to shut this down immediately. We can't have beggars cluttering up our streets. Maria felt every eye in the parking lot burning into her soul. The shame was overwhelming, but worse than that was the helplessness. Here was a man who'd never worried about where his next meal would come from, publicly humiliating a woman who was just trying to feed her children. For the first time since Carlos died, Maria's composure completely cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she stood behind her cart, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her entire life. But someone else was watching this cruel display. Someone who understood exactly what real character looked like when it was being tested by bullies and cowards. The quiet Tuesday customer stood in the crowd, and what he saw that day would change Maria's life forever. The following Tuesday came and went, and for the first time in months, Maria's regular customer didn't show up. She found herself glancing at her watch every few minutes, checking 12:30, then 12:45, then 1 o'clock. By 2 in the afternoon, she had to accept that he wasn't coming. The disappointment hit her harder than she expected, because losing his weekly kindness felt like losing her last connection to hope itself. Maybe he'd witnessed Richard Blackwood's public humiliation and decided he didn't want to be associated with someone the town considered an embarrassment. Maybe he'd finally gotten tired of her simple tamales and moved on to something better. Maria tried to push down the hurt, but that $2 tip and those kind words had meant more to her than he could ever know. 3 days later, something impossible happened. Maria opened her mailbox to find an envelope with no return address containing a cashier's check for $10,000. $10,000. She stared at the numbers until they blurred through her tears, certain this had to be some kind of mistake. But there it was, made out to Maria Gonzalez, along with a simple handwritten note that said, "For someone who feeds people with love." Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the check. This was more money than she'd seen since before Carlos got sick. This was enough to save her house, pay off the foreclosure, and give her family breathing room for the first time in 2 years. But who could have done this? Who even knew about her situation well enough to care? Maria spent the next week trying to solve the mystery. She drove to 3 different banks, but privacy laws meant no one could tell her anything about where the check came from. She asked every regular customer, every neighbor, even contacted the local church to see if they'd organize some kind of secret fundraiser. Nothing. Nobody knew anything about a $10,000 gift. The mystery was driving her crazy, but in the most wonderful way possible. Someone out there had seen her struggle and decided to help, not for recognition or gratitude, but simply because they believed she deserved better. Maria used the money to save her house and expand her cart operation, adding more variety to her menu and extending her hours. Business started picking up, and for the first time since Carlos died, she dared to dream about the future again. 2 weeks after the mysterious check arrived, Maria's quiet Tuesday routine was shattered by something she never could have predicted. She was arranging fresh tamales in her cart when she noticed a news van pulling into the grocery store parking lot, followed by another van, then another. Camera crews started setting up equipment, and Maria's heart began racing. Had she done something wrong? Was this about permits or health violations? A well-dressed reporter approached her cart with a microphone and a smile that seemed too bright for such an ordinary Tuesday. "Maria Gonzalez?" she asked, and when Maria nodded nervously, the reporter continued, "We're here to talk about your most loyal customer. Do you recognize this man?" She held up a photograph, and Maria's world tilted completely off its axis. It was him, her quiet Tuesday regular, the man who always ordered 6 tamales and left a $2 tip. But the caption under his photo read, "Thomas Chen, tech billionaire, net worth $2.8 billion. Maria stared at the picture, then at the reporter, then back at the picture, unable to process what she was seeing. The man who dressed in worn jeans and old sneakers, who spoke softly and never demanded attention, was one of the richest people in America. Mr. Chen has been visiting small towns across the country, the reporter explained, searching for authentic cuisine and genuine people to partner with his restaurant empire. He's been eating your tamales every Tuesday for months, and he has something very important to discuss with you. As if on cue, a simple sedan pulled up, and Thomas Chen stepped out, looking exactly the same as always, humble, understated, and kind. But now Maria understood that his quiet presence had been something far more significant than she'd ever imagined. He walked over with that same gentle smile she'd grown to treasure and said, "Hello, Maria. I hope you don't mind the cameras, but I wanted the world to see what I've discovered." What happened next changed everything Maria thought she knew about her future. Thomas looked directly into her eyes and said, "Your food has something that can't be bought or faked. It has soul. Your tamales remind me why I fell in love with cooking in the first place. I want to offer you an exclusive contract to bring your recipes to 500 locations nationwide, starting with a guaranteed $50,000 monthly, plus ownership stakes that will make you a millionaire within 2 years." Maria's legs nearly gave out beneath her. The news of Maria's partnership with Thomas Chen spread through Millbrook like wildfire, and suddenly everyone who had treated her like an invisible nuisance wanted to be her best friend. The same women who had whispered cruel comments about her lowering property values were now calling her phone, asking if she remembered them, suggesting lunch dates and business partnerships. The hypocrisy was almost comical, but Maria handled it with the same grace she'd shown during her darkest days. Richard Blackwood, the man who had publicly humiliated her and called her a pathetic spectacle, found himself in a particularly uncomfortable position. Within a month of Maria's announcement, his fancy restaurant started losing customers who were curious about the authentic tamales everyone was talking about. Local food bloggers who had never noticed Maria before were now writing glowing reviews about her humble beginnings and extraordinary flavors. The irony was perfect. The woman he'd tried to destroy was now his biggest competition. But here's what made Maria truly special. She chose forgiveness over revenge. When Richard approached her with an awkward apology and a desperate request to cater an event at his restaurant, Maria accepted graciously. She didn't humiliate him the way he had humiliated her. Instead, she showed him what real class looked like, proving that success hadn't changed who she was at her core. The transformation in Maria's life was nothing short of miraculous. The foreclosure notice was paid off within a week, and Sophia's college fund went from empty to overflowing. Miguel got new shoes, new clothes, and the confidence that comes from knowing his mother's hard work had finally been rewarded. Maria opened her flagship restaurant right in the heart of Millbrook, in a building 3 times larger than Richard Blackwood's establishment. Within 6 months, she was employing 15 people from her own community, including some of the same folks who had once looked down on her cart with disdain. She paid them well, treated them with respect, and created the kind of workplace where dignity mattered more than hierarchy. Thomas Chen became more than a business partner. He became a trusted friend who visited Millbrook regularly, always ordering the same 6 tamales that had started their incredible journey together. The small Texas town that had once considered Maria an embarrassment now celebrated her as their greatest success story. And Maria's grandmother's recipe became the foundation of a food empire that stretched across America. Maria's story didn't end with financial success. It became something much more powerful than that. Within months, her incredible journey had gone viral across social media, inspiring millions of people who were fighting their own battles against impossible odds. Videos of her transformation were shared by celebrities, business leaders, and ordinary people who saw themselves in her struggle. She received thousands of letters from single parents, immigrants, and anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible by a world that didn't seem to care. But Maria understood that her platform came with responsibility. She didn't want to just be another rags to riches story that people forgot about after a few weeks. She wanted to create lasting change for people who were still standing where she had once stood, exhausted, desperate, but refusing to give up. So she partnered with Thomas Chen to establish the Carlos Gonzalez Memorial Scholarship Fund, named after her late husband, specifically designed to help struggling single parents pursue education and start their own businesses. The scholarship program provided not just money, but mentorship, business training, and the kind of support system that Maria had desperately needed during her darkest days. Every recipient received a personal letter from Maria, reminding them that their current circumstances didn't define their future potential, and that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary Tuesday customers. Thomas Chen often spoke about how finding Maria had reminded him why he'd gotten into the restaurant business in the first place. Success isn't just about profit margins, he would tell business conferences around the world. It's about recognizing excellence wherever you find it, even if it's being sold from a cart outside a grocery store. Maria didn't just feed people tamales, she fed them with love, and that's something you can't manufacture or fake. The lesson in Maria's story goes far beyond business success or even personal triumph. It's about the power of persistence when everything seems hopeless, the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, and the incredible things that can happen when someone with resources chooses to lift up someone with talent but no platform. Maria's story proves that persistence and kindness always triumph over cruelty and greed, even when it takes longer than we'd like and comes in ways we never expected. If this story has inspired you the way it's inspired me, I need you to do something important. Smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs hope today, someone who's fighting their own battle and wondering if their hard work will ever pay off. Subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things through determination and grace. Because here's what I know for certain. You never know who's watching your journey, learning from your character, and waiting for the right moment to change your life forever. Maria's Tuesday customer taught us that angels don't always announce themselves with trumpets and halos. Sometimes they show up in worn jeans and old sneakers, ordering 6 tamales and leaving $2 tips. Remember Maria's story the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their circumstances rather than their character. Remember it when you're facing your own impossible odds and wondering if anyone notices your effort. And most importantly, remember it when you have the power to be someone else's Tuesday customer. The person who sees potential where others see problems, who offers kindness where others offer judgment. Your dreams matter, your hard work matters, and you never know when your next customer, your next conversation, or your next act of perseverance might be the one that changes everything. Keep going, keep believing, and never forget that the best stories always start with someone who refused to give up, even when the whole world seemed to be against them.